It's 1993. The golden era of professional wrestling is gasping for air. Hulkamania, the phenomenon that had carried the World Wrestling Federation through the better part of a decade, is not just fading away, it's being forcibly extinguished by scandal, controversy, and the harsh reality that the superhero era of wrestling is dying. The new generation that Vince McMahon so desperately wants to push isn't catching on, and what should have been a transitional year becomes a masterclass in how not to book professional wrestling. This is the comprehensive story of everything that went catastrophically wrong in the World Wrestling Federation during 1993, a year so mismanaged that it nearly killed the company before the Monday Night Wars even began. The year kicked off with what should have been a slam dunk: the Royal Rumble, traditionally one of the WWF's most exciting events. But the 1993 edition was a harbinger of the disasters to come. The Rumble match itself was the weakest the event had ever produced up to that point, and considering this was only the 6th Rumble in history, that's saying something. The match was devastatingly low on legitimate star power and even lower on crowd energy. The atmosphere in the arena was so dead you could hear individual conversations in the crowd during what should have been the most exciting moments. When Bob Backlund, a champion from the pre-Hulkamania era who hadn't been relevant since 1983, is one of the most memorable aspects of your marquee match, you know something has gone terribly wrong. Backlund managed to last nearly an hour in the ring, setting a then record for longevity at 61 minutes and 10 seconds. But here's the thing: nobody cared. The crowd reaction to Backlund's marathon performance was lukewarm at best, confused at worst. Fans didn't understand why this relic from wrestling's past was being presented as a viable threat in 1993. It was like watching your dad try to hang out with your friends: awkward, uncomfortable, and ultimately pointless. The finish of the Rumble was even worse than the match itself. Randy Savage and Yokozuna were the final two competitors, which on paper should have been compelling. Savage was still a legitimate star, and Yokozuna was being positioned as the monster heel of the future. But somehow, someway, they managed to completely botch what should have been a simple finish. Savage, in a moment of either confusion or stubborn adherence to an outdated script, hit his signature flying elbow on the 500-pound Yokozuna and then inexplicably tried to pin him. In a Royal Rumble match, where the only way to win is to throw your opponent over the top rope. The confusion didn't end there. Yokozuna kicked out with such force that Savage was launched backwards over the top rope in what looked like an accident but was supposedly the planned finish. The commentary team had to scramble to explain why the referee was declaring Yokozuna the winner when it looked like Savage had simply fallen out of the ring by mistake. Gorilla Monsoon tried to sell it as Yokozuna's incredible strength, but the damage was done. The crowd was confused, Savage looked foolish, and Yokozuna's big win felt hollow and unearned. But wait, it gets worse. Also at the Royal Rumble, the WWE decided to debut one of the most embarrassing characters in professional wrestling history, Giant Gonzalez. This 8-foot-tall Argentine basketball player turned wrestler might have been genuinely intimidating, if not for one small problem. He was wearing what can only be described as the most ridiculous costume in wrestling history. The airbrushed muscle suit, complete with fake hair glued onto it to simulate body hair, made him look less like a monster and more like a rejected design from a low-budget science fiction movie. The suit was so poorly designed that you could see where the airbrush artist had tried to create Abby muscles that didn't align with Gonzalez's actual body structure. It was wrestling's equivalent of drawing abs on with a Sharpie. For reasons that remain unclear to this day, they didn't include Gonzalez as an official entry in the Rumble match. Instead, he just wandered out during the match like a lost tourist, eliminated The Undertaker, who wasn't eliminated because he wasn't thrown over the top rope by a legal participant, and then just left. The whole segment was bizarre, confusing, and set up one of the worst feuds in wrestling history. The crowd's reaction said it all. Confused silence followed by half-hearted boos, not because they were invested in the storyline, but because they were annoyed at having their time wasted. If the Royal Rumble was bad, WrestleMania 9 was a catastrophe of epic proportions. Held outdoors at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas with a Roman Empire theme that nobody asked for, the show is still widely considered one of the worst WrestleManias of all time. And that's saying something in a company that would later give us WrestleMania 11 and WrestleMania 2000. The Roman theme was Vince McMahon at his most out of touch. Every wrestler had to enter wearing a toga. Commentary was done from a position called Julius Caesar's Palace. Bobby Heenan wore a toga backwards and spent the entire show looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Jim Ross made his WWF debut wearing a toga. It was surreal, uncomfortable, and added nothing to the show except unintentional comedy. The crowd, sitting in the blazing Las Vegas sun, seemed more interested in finding shade than watching the matches. The Undertaker vs. Giant Gonzalez match wasn't just bad, it was historically awful. The Undertaker, who would go on to have classic matches with everyone from Shawn Michaels to CM Punk, later admitted that his matches with Gonzalez took years off his career, and he wasn't talking about the chloroform fumes. Gonzalez moved with all the grace and agility of a tranquilized giraffe. He couldn't bump, couldn't sell, and could barely walk without looking like he was about to tip over. The match psychology was non-existent. Gonzalez would throw slow, plodding strikes that looked like he was swatting at flies. The Undertaker would sell them like death, trying desperately to make Gonzalez look credible. At one point, Gonzalez attempted a chokehold that looked more like he was checking Undertaker's temperature. The crowd, already suffering in the desert heat, began actively booing not out of heat for the heel, but out of genuine displeasure with what they were watching. The finish was the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday. Gonzalez, unable to actually beat The Undertaker in any convincing fashion, pulled out a rag supposedly soaked in chloroform and knocked The Undertaker out with it. This caused a disqualification, meaning that after suffering through this abomination of a match, there wasn't even a decisive finish. The Undertaker won by DQ, Gonzalez looked weak despite his size advantage, and the feud inexplicably continued. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of confusion and anger. They had just watched two giants stumble around for nearly 10 minutes only for it to end with a magic rag. But the real disaster of WrestleMania 9 was the main event, or rather, what happened after the main event. Bret the Hitman Hart, who had been carrying the company on his back for months as WWE champion, defended his title against the 500-pound Yokozuna. The match itself was decent. Not great, but certainly the best thing on the show up to that point. Bret was working his ass off to make Yokozuna look like a legitimate monster, and for a while, it was working. The crowd was invested, cheering for Bret and booing Yokozuna and his manager Mr. Fuji. Then came the finish. Mr. Fuji threw salt in Bret's eyes. Yes, salt. Not even something interesting like the chloroform from earlier, allowing Yokozuna to pin him and win the WWE Championship. The crowd was deflated but not devastated. Yokozuna as champion made sense from a storyline perspective, and Bret could chase him for a rematch. It was Sports Entertainment 101. But then Hulk Hogan's music hit. Hogan, who hadn't been advertised for the show and had wrestled earlier in a tag team match, came out to supposedly check on Bret. Then, in a moment that still infuriates wrestling fans to this day, Mr. Fuji challenged Hogan to an impromptu title match. Bret, still blinded by salt, somehow agreed to this on Hogan's behalf. Though how a blinded ex-champion has the authority to book title matches remains a mystery. The match lasted exactly 22 seconds. Fuji accidentally threw salt in Yokozuna's eyes. Hogan hit the leg drop, and suddenly Hulk Hogan was WWE champion again. In those 22 seconds, the WWE managed to bury both Bret Hart and Yokozuna. Bret looked like a chump who couldn't get the job done. Yokozuna looked like a joke who lost the title in less than half a minute. And Hogan stood tall as the conquering hero, despite the fact that the audience had been conditioned for months to see him as yesterday's news. The crowd's reaction was telling. Some cheered out of nostalgia, but many sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. It's now widely known that Hogan used his political power backstage to convince Vince McMahon to give him one more run with the title. Hogan claimed he would drop the belt back to Bret at SummerSlam, building to a passing of the torch moment. Spoiler alert, he lied. But to the fans watching in 1993, none of this backstage drama was known. All they saw was their new champion getting punked out and an aging Hogan stealing the spotlight once again. The WWE tried to explain Hogan's impromptu title win by having their fictional president, Jack Tunney, claim he had approved the match. Jack Tunney had been the on-screen authority figure since the mid-1980s, a supposedly neutral arbiter who would appear whenever the company needed to explain away booking decisions that made no logical sense. He was the deus ex machina of professional wrestling, the magical fix-it man who could make any storyline work through the power of executive decree. But by 1993, the Jack Tunney character had become a crutch, and a broken one at that. His decisions were increasingly arbitrary and nonsensical. Later in the year, he would strip Shawn Michaels of the Intercontinental Championship for not defending it often enough, despite the fact that Michaels had been wrestling on television regularly. The real reason, known now but hidden then, was that Michaels had tested positive for steroids during the company's steroid trial scandal. But instead of addressing this honestly or coming up with a believable storyline reason, they had Tunney make a decision that made no sense within the logic of the show. The fans were starting to notice these plot holes. If Tunney was concerned about title defenses, why didn't he book Michaels in title matches? He was the president, after all. If he could approve Hogan's impromptu title match at WrestleMania, why couldn't he disapprove of Mr. Fuji throwing salt in people's eyes? The character of Jack Tunney had become a symbol of everything wrong with WWE's storytelling in 1993. Lazy, inconsistent, and treating the audience like idiots. In the midst of all this chaos, the WWE actually did something right. They launched Monday Night Raw, premiering on January 11th, 1993, from the Manhattan Center in New York City. Raw was genuinely revolutionary for its time. The smaller venue gave it an intimate, underground feel that was completely different from the WWE's other programming. The fans were right on top of the action, creating an electric atmosphere that made every match feel important. The show was a radical departure from WWE's other TV offerings, which consisted almost entirely of squash matches, established stars beating jobbers in under 3 minutes. Raw featured competitive matches between actual stars. The first episode saw Yokozuna face Koko B. Ware, the Steiner brothers defend their tag team championships against the Executioners, and Shawn Michaels wrestle Max Moon. While not all of these were classics, they were actual matches with actual stakes. The production was grittier and more realistic than the cartoon-like presentation of WWE Superstars or Wrestling Challenge. The lighting was darker, the camera angles were more dynamic, and there was a sense that anything could happen. When the show was actually live, you could feel the energy through the television screen. But even Raw wasn't immune to the WWE's 1993 problems. The biggest issue was Rob Bartlett, a New York radio personality who was hired to be the show's color commentator, despite having absolutely no knowledge of professional wrestling. Vince McMahon thought Bartlett would bring unpredictability and mainstream appeal to the commentary booth. Instead, he brought confusion, annoyance, and some of the worst commentary in wrestling history. Bartlett spent one episode doing an extended Elvis Presley impression, claiming to be Vince McMahon's cousin Vince Elvis McMahon for the entire show. Another time, while calling a Yokozuna match, he genuinely asked on air if Yokozuna was Japanese for chicken. He would make jokes that had nothing to do with wrestling, reference pop culture that the wrestling audience didn't care about, and generally act like he'd rather be anywhere else. His commentary was so bad that fans would actually write letters to the WWE demanding his removal. The contrast between Bartlett and Bobby. The Brain Heenan, who had recently left for WCW, was stark. Where Heenan was witty, knowledgeable, and enhanced the product, Bartlett was clueless, annoying, and actively detracted from it. Thankfully, the WWE came to their senses and removed him after a few months, replacing him with Randy Savage, who, while not perfect, at least knew what a wrestling hold was. But those first few months of Raw were nearly unwatchable thanks to Bartlett's presence, and many fans who tuned out during this period didn't come back for years. The WWE had always been the land of larger-than-life characters and outlandish gimmicks. In the 1980s, this approach worked perfectly. The Rock and Wrestling Connection era thrived on colorful characters that felt like real-life comic book heroes and villains. But by 1993, the gimmick machine had gone completely off the rails, producing some of the worst characters in wrestling history. Let's start with Max Moon, portrayed by Paul Diamond. This character was supposedly a cyborg from the future, complete with a costume that looked like it was bought from a discount Halloween store the day after Halloween. The outfit featured blue and pink spandex, ridiculous shoulder pads, and a helmet that shot fireworks, when it worked, which wasn't often. The character's entrance involved him shooting confetti from his wrists like a bargain basement Spider-Man. The matches were actually decent because Diamond was a good wrestler, but nobody could take the character seriously. Max Moon disappeared after a few months, with the explanation that he had returned to his home planet or timeline, or whatever nonsensical origin they had given him. Then there was Atom Bomb, portrayed by Brian Clark. His gimmick was that he was a survivor of the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster who had been mutated by radiation. He wore red contact lenses to make his eyes look radioactive, and had a manager named Johnny Polo who would wear protective goggles to shield himself from Atom Bomb's radiation. The character's finisher was called the Atom Smasher, because subtlety was dead. The nuclear theme extended to everything. His entrance video featured mushroom clouds, his merchandise glowed in the dark, and commentary would make constant nuclear puns that made everyone groan. The character was DOA, despite Clark being a physically impressive performer. IRS, Irwin R. Shyster, portrayed by Mike Rotunda, was at least coherent as a gimmick, but that didn't make it good. He was an evil tax collector who wrestled in suspenders, a dress shirt, and a tie. His promos consisted entirely of tax-related puns and threats to audit his opponents. Every single promo followed the same formula: you haven't paid your taxes. Everyone pays their taxes to IRS. The character was designed to get heel heat by representing everyone's least favorite government agency, but instead of heat, it got apathy. Nobody wanted to see a wrestling tax collector, no matter how good Rotunda was in the ring. Skinner, portrayed by Steve Kern, was allegedly an alligator hunter from the Florida Everglades. He would spit tobacco juice on his opponents and carry dead alligators to the ring. His finisher was called the Gator Breaker. The character was essentially Crocodile Dundee, if Crocodile Dundee had been homeless and had a serious substance abuse problem. Kieran, who had been a successful tag team wrestler, as one of the fabulous ones in the 1980s, was reduced to portraying a stereotype that even people in 1993 found offensive and outdated. But the absolute nadir of WWE gimmicks in 1993 was Bastion Booger. This wasn't even a gimmick. It was a punishment. The man behind this disaster was Mike Shaw, a talented wrestler who had found success in other promotions as Norman the Lunatic and had actually gotten over in WCW with that character. When he joined the WWE, they initially gave him a gimmick as Friar Ferguson, a mad monk who would dance and make religious references. This character appeared exactly twice before religious groups complained and the WWE pulled it. Shaw needed a new gimmick, and unfortunately for him, Vince McMahon had noticed that Shaw had gained weight. As a punishment for being out of shape, and this is according to multiple sources from the time, McMahon decided to humiliate Shaw by giving him the Bastion Booger character. The gimmick was literally that he was a disgusting, overweight slob who wore a dirty gray unitard that looked like dingy underwear. He would eat during his entrance, burp in opponents' faces, and generally be as repulsive as possible. The character had no backstory, no motivation, no reason for existing except to humiliate Mike Shaw. His entrance music was just burping and farting sounds. His finisher was a running splash that commentary would describe as crushing opponents with his bulk. Shaw, by all accounts, was miserable portraying this character, but needed the paycheck. He would later say in interviews that the Bastion Booger period was the lowest point of his career, and considering he once wrestled in a promotion that went bankrupt mid-show, that's saying something. The 1993 King of the Ring pay-per-view should have been a turning point for the company. With Hulk Hogan essentially out the door, this was the perfect opportunity to establish new stars and create fresh storylines. The tournament format was ideal for this. 8 men competing in a single elimination tournament with the winner crowned King of the Ring and ostensibly becoming the #1 contender for the WWE Championship. The tournament portion of the show was actually excellent, and that's entirely thanks to Bret Hart. The Hitman entered the tournament as one of the favorites alongside Razor Ramon, Mr. Perfect, and Bam Bam Bigelow. But what made Bret's run special wasn't just that he won, it was how he won, and the story he told throughout the night. His first-round match against Razor Ramon was a technical masterpiece. These two had chemistry that was off the charts, and they told a perfect David versus Goliath story with Bret as the technical wizard overcoming Razor's power and aggression. These two had chemistry that was off the charts, and they told a perfect David versus Goliath story with Bret as the technical wizard overcoming Razor's power and aggression. The match went nearly 11 minutes, an eternity for a tournament match, and featured near falls that had the crowd on their feet. When Bret won with a small package, it felt like a genuine upset even though Bret was a former WWE champion. The semifinals saw Bret face Mr. Perfect, and this is where the tournament really kicked into high gear. Perfect, and Bret had been building to this match for months, with Perfect playing the veteran trying to prove he still had it, and Bret as the new generation leader. The match was a technical clinic, featuring reversals of reversals, and some of the smoothest chain wrestling ever seen in a WWE ring. But the finish was controversial. Perfect's back gave out, and Bret won when Perfect couldn't continue. This added layers to the story. Had Bret really beaten Perfect, or had Perfect beaten himself? The finals against Bam Bam Bigelow was where Bret cemented his status as the company's top babyface. By this point in the night, Bret was selling exhaustion and the accumulation of damage from 2 grueling matches. Bigelow, who had received a bye to the finals when his opponent couldn't compete, was fresh. The match told the perfect story of Hart versus power, will versus strength. Bret took an absolute beating, with Bigelow throwing him around like a rag doll, but Bret kept fighting, kept surviving, and eventually caught Bigelow in a victory roll for the win. The coronation ceremony that followed, with Bret being crowned King of the Ring, felt like a genuine moment. The crowd was on their feet, and for a brief moment it seemed like the WWE had successfully transitioned to the next generation. Bret had carried the entire tournament on his back, having 3 different great matches with 3 different opponents, each telling a different story. It was a virtuoso performance that proved Bret Hart was the real deal. But then came the main event, and the WWE managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory once again. The main event of King of the Ring, 1993, was supposed to be simple. Hulk Hogan drops the WWE Championship to Yokozuna, establishing Yokozuna as the monster heel champion and setting up future programs with Bret Hart and other babyfaces. Hogan was leaving the company, this was known, and this was his chance to go out on his back and help build the next generation. But if you believe that was going to happen, you didn't know Hulk Hogan. The match itself was terrible. Hogan, clearly not giving his best effort because he knew he was leaving, phoned it in completely. His offense consisted of punches, clotheslines, and the occasional body slam. Yokozuna, still green and needing someone to lead him through the match, was lost. The crowd, which had been hot for the tournament, was dead for this main event. They knew they were watching Hogan's last match, and Hogan was wrestling like he knew it too, going through the motions without any passion or energy. But it was the finish that really exemplified everything wrong with WWE in 1993. Instead of just having Yokozuna beat Hogan clean, which would have established him as a legitimate monster, they had to protect Hogan's ego with a convoluted finish. A Japanese photographer jumped on the apron to take a picture of Hogan. The camera exploded in Hogan's face, temporarily blinding him. Yokozuna then hit a leg drop, Hogan's own finisher, and pinned him for the title. Think about how stupid this was for a second. Hulk Hogan, the man who had kicked out of everything for a decade, was defeated by a camera flash and his own finishing move. Yokozuna didn't look strong. He looked lucky. Hogan didn't look noble in defeat. He looked like an idiot who fell for the most obvious trap in wrestling history. And the fans didn't get a satisfying conclusion. They got a screwjob finish that left everyone looking weak. After the match, Hogan literally disappeared. He didn't appear on television to give Yokozuna his rematch. He didn't put anyone over on his way out. He just left, taking his ball and going home. The WWE had to scramble to explain his absence, eventually having announcer Vince McMahon claim that Hogan was recuperating from his injuries and might never wrestle again. It was a pathetic end to Hulkamania in the WWE, and it left the company without its biggest star and without having created a new one in his place. With Hogan gone, Vince McMahon needed a new American hero to combat the evil foreign menace of Yokozuna. His choice was perhaps the most baffling of all. The narcissist Lex Luger, who had spent the first half of 1993 as a heel obsessed with his own physique, would suddenly become a patriotic babyface overnight. The transformation happened on July 4th, 1993, aboard the USS Intrepid, a decommissioned aircraft carrier docked in New York Harbor. The WWE held a Stars and Stripes challenge, where supposedly no American athlete could body slam the 500-pound Yokozuna. Various athletes tried and failed, including NFL players and other legitimate athletes, building to the big moment when Lex Luger arrived via helicopter wearing an American flag shirt. The visual was actually impressive. Luger, with his bodybuilder physique, looked like a real-life G.I. Joe action figure. When he successfully slammed Yokozuna on the deck of the ship with actual Navy personnel cheering in the background, it should have been a star-making moment. The fireworks, the patriotic music, the American flag waving in the background, all the pieces were there for this to work. But it didn't work, and the reason was simple. Nobody bought Lex Luger as a hero. Just 6 months earlier, Luger had been knocking out babyfaces with his loaded forearm. He had been managed by Bobby Heenan and had spent his time posing in front of mirrors and declaring himself the narcissist. The character change was so abrupt and so obviously manufactured that fans immediately rejected it. It didn't help that Luger himself seemed uncomfortable in the role, his promos coming across as stilted and insincere. But Vince McMahon, convinced he had found his new Hulk Hogan, doubled down. Thus was born the Lex Express, a red, white, and blue tour bus that would carry Luger across America in a grassroots campaign to build support for his SummerSlam title match against Yokozuna. The idea was to recreate the organic groundswell of support that had built around Hulk Hogan in the mid-1980s, except this time it would be completely artificial and corporate-sponsored. The Lex Express campaign was a masterclass in how not to get a wrestler over. Every stop was carefully choreographed and felt like a corporate PR event, rather than a genuine interaction with fans. Luger would show up at Walmart stores, shopping malls, and local TV stations, giving the same robotic speech about American values and how he was going to beat Yokozuna for America. The tour stops were poorly attended. Some events had fewer than 100 people show up, and those who did attend seemed more interested in free WWE merchandise than in Lex Luger himself. The campaign reeked of desperation. They had Luger meeting with mayors, visiting children's hospitals, and even attending minor league baseball games. At one stop, they had him participate in a hot dog eating contest. At another, he arm wrestled local tough guys. It was like watching someone's dad try to be cool by using outdated slang. Painful and embarrassing for everyone involved, the wrestling media, such as it was in 1993, was ruthless in its mockery. The Wrestling Observer newsletter called it the most forced push in wrestling history. Pro Wrestling Illustrated ran articles questioning whether fans would accept such an obvious manufacture of a hero. Even mainstream media that covered the tour stops seemed bemused by the whole spectacle, with one reporter asking Luger directly if he thought fans would accept him as the next Hulk Hogan, to which Luger gave a rambling non-answer about American values. After 6 weeks of the Lex Express touring the country, everything built to SummerSlam 1993 at the Palace of Auburn Hills in Michigan. This was supposed to be Luger's coronation, the moment where he would defeat Yokozuna and become the new standard-bearer for the WWE. The video packages leading up to the match portrayed it as literally a battle for America's soul. They had children on camera saying they were counting on Lex Luger. They showed American flags waving in slow motion. It was patriotic propaganda that would make a Michael Bay movie look subtle. The match itself was actually decent. Luger, whatever his flaws as a character, was a competent wrestler, and by this point, Yokozuna had improved significantly from his Wrestlemania performance. They told a simple but effective story, Luger using his power and athleticism to combat Yokozuna's size and Mr. Fuji's interference. The crowd, despite their lukewarm feelings about Luger, was actually getting into it. When Luger finally hit his loaded forearm shot on Yokozuna, the place erupted. And then came one of the stupidest booking decisions in wrestling history. Luger's forearm shot knocked Yokozuna out of the ring. The referee began counting. Yokozuna couldn't answer the count. Luger won the match by countout, which meant Yokozuna retained the WWE Championship because titles don't change hands on a countout. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of confusion and anger. They had just watched 2 months of build-up for a countout finish. Luger began celebrating like he had won the title, complete with confetti falling from the ceiling and baby faces running out to celebrate with him. The Steiner brothers lifted him on their shoulders. Randy Savage was jumping around like Luger had just won the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, the fans were looking at each other asking, did he win the title or not? The commentary team tried desperately to sell this as a moral victory. Vince McMahon screamed about how Luger had proven he could beat Yokozuna. Randy Savage yelled about American pride, but the damage was done. The fans felt cheated, and more importantly, they saw Luger as a loser who celebrated not winning. It would be like celebrating getting second place in a race you were supposed to win. The original plan, according to multiple sources, was for Luger to win the title. But sometime between the Lex Express starting and SummerSlam, Vince McMahon got cold feet. Maybe it was the poor attendance at tour stops. Maybe it was the lukewarm merchandise sales. Maybe it was the focus groups that showed fans didn't connect with Luger. Whatever the reason, McMahon decided at the last minute not to pull the trigger, but nobody bothered to tell the production team to cancel the celebration. Making matters worse, the same show featured another count-out finish in the Intercontinental Championship match between Shawn Michaels and Mr. Perfect. This was actually a fantastic match. Many consider it one of the best matches of 1993, but it ended with both men being counted out while brawling outside the ring. 2 count-out finishes on the same pay-per-view, both in title matches. It was like the WWE was actively trying to anger its fan base. One of the most tragic wastes of potential in 1993 was the character assassination of Doink the Clown. When Doink debuted in late 1992, portrayed by Matt Bourne, he was genuinely one of the most innovative and interesting characters the WWE had created in years. This wasn't your typical wrestling clown. This was a psychological horror movie villain who happened to wear clown makeup. The original Doink was genuinely unsettling. Bourne played him as a sociopath who took pleasure in others' pain. He would trip children at ringside and laugh maniacally. He would hide under the ring and attack wrestlers from behind. His pranks weren't funny, they were cruel. His entrance music was circus music played in a minor key that sounded like something from a nightmare. He would stand in the corner before matches just staring at his opponents, occasionally breaking into disturbing laughter for no reason. The psychology Bourne brought to the character was brilliant. In interviews, Doink would start sentences normally and then trail off into nonsensical rambling or sudden violent outbursts. He would paint different expressions on his face to mess with opponents. Sometimes sad, sometimes angry, always disturbing. There was one memorable segment where he spent 5 minutes making balloon animals for kids, only to pop them in their faces and laugh as they cried. The matches were excellent too. Bourne was a veteran wrestler who understood ring psychology, and he incorporated the clown gimmick perfectly into his ring work. He would pretend to cry when hurt, only to sucker punch opponents when they showed concern. He would do pratfalls and silly walks to mock opponents, then suddenly switch to vicious technical wrestling. It was unlike anything else in wrestling at the time. But as the WWE shifted more toward a family-friendly product in mid-1993, the edge was systematically removed from Doink. The company was facing pressure from sponsors about content, dealing with the steroid trial, and trying to appeal to a younger demographic. A psychotic clown who traumatized children didn't fit that new direction. The turn from heel to babyface was handled horribly. They simply had Doink show up one day as a good guy, with no explanation for his change of heart. The disturbing pranks were replaced with water guns and whoopee cushions. The psychological warfare was replaced with silly faces and balloon animals that he actually gave to children instead of popping. The minor key circus music was replaced with upbeat carnival tunes. It was a complete 180 that made no narrative sense. Making matters worse, Matt Bourne was released from the company in September 1993 due to personal issues. Rather than retire the character with its creator gone, they simply replaced him with Ray Apollo. Apollo was a competent wrestler, but had none of Bourne's understanding of the character's psychology. The nadir came at Survivor Series 1993 with the 4 Doinks match. The gimmick was that Doink would have 3 partners who were also dressed as clowns, except they weren't actually Doinks. They were just other wrestlers in clown makeup. The team consisted of Luke Williams and Butch Miller and Mabel and Mo, all dressed as clowns. It was supposed to be comedy, but it came across as desperate and sad. The match itself was a disaster. The Bushwhackers couldn't work as heels, men on a mission were too green to carry the match, and Ray Apollo as Doink looked lost without Bourne's character work to guide him. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or boo, and mostly chose to do neither. It was embarrassing for everyone involved, especially when compared to the brilliant psychological character Doink had been just a year earlier. Looming over everything in 1993 was the federal steroid trial that would officially begin in 1994, but was already casting a dark shadow over the company. The WWE was under investigation for allegedly distributing steroids to wrestlers, and the possibility of Vince McMahon going to prison was very real. This affected everything about the product in 1993. The most obvious change was in the physiques of the wrestlers. Guys who had been massive suddenly showed up looking deflated. The British Bulldog went from looking like a bodybuilder to looking like a regular athlete. Crush lost probably 30 pounds of muscle. Even guys who weren't on steroids were told to slim down to avoid the appearance of drug use. The WWE wanted to project a cleaner image, which meant no more larger-than-life physiques. This created a presentation problem. The WWE had spent a decade telling fans that these were the greatest athletes in the world, superhumans who could perform incredible feats of strength. Now suddenly, they looked like regular guys. The mystique was gone, and with it went a lot of what made WWE special compared to other wrestling promotions. The investigation also affected storylines. Any angle that might be seen as promoting drug use was immediately nixed. Characters like Nails, who had accused Vince McMahon of abuse, were removed from television. The company became ultra-conservative in its content, avoiding anything that might draw negative attention from federal investigators or mainstream media. By the end of 1993, the World Wrestling Federation was in the worst shape it had been since Vince McMahon had taken over from his father. Attendance was down. House shows that had drawn 10,000 fans in 1991 were drawing 2,000 in 1993. Pay-per-view buy rates were in free fall. Monday Night Raw, despite being a creative success, was expensive to produce and wasn't generating enough ad revenue to justify its cost. The company was hemorrhaging money, and there were legitimate discussions about selling to Ted Turner or simply closing down. The roster was decimated. Hulk Hogan was gone to WCW, where he would eventually lead them to victory in the Monday Night Wars. The Ultimate Warrior was gone after another dispute with management. Randy Savage was being phased out as an active wrestler. The new generation, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, Diesel, weren't drawing money yet. The gimmicks that remained were embarrassing, the storylines made no sense, and the product felt like a parody of what wrestling had been just a few years earlier. The creative bankruptcy was evident in every aspect of the product. They were recycling ideas from the 1980s, but executing them worse. They were pushing wrestlers the fans didn't want, while ignoring the ones they did. They were booking finishes designed to protect everyone, which ended up making everyone look weak. It was professional wrestling by committee, with no clear vision or direction. The year 1993 stands as a cautionary tale in professional wrestling history. It shows what happens when a promotion loses touch with its audience, when politics override good business, when creative desperation leads to throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. The WWE would eventually recover. The Attitude Era was just a few years away, but the scars from 1993 would last for years. From the Lex Express that went nowhere, to The Undertaker choking on chloroform, from Bastion Booger's humiliation to Doink's character assassination. From Giant Gonzalez's airbrushed abs to Hulk Hogan's political maneuvering, 1993 was the year everything went wrong for the World Wrestling Federation. It was a year so bad that it makes current WWE creative complaints look like nitpicking. It was a year so mismanaged that it nearly killed the company that would eventually become a billion-dollar entertainment empire. The lessons of 1993 are clear: respect your audience, push the wrestlers they want to see, create logical storylines, and never ever put someone in an airbrushed muscle suit. Because sometimes the worst year in your history becomes the learning experience that saves your future. The WWE survived 1993, barely, and emerged eventually as a stronger company. But for those who lived through it, whether as fans, wrestlers, or executives, 1993 remains the year that wrestling forgot how to wrestle. Like and subscribe for 1,000 years of luck.